Hi, my name is Muhammad Irfan bin ZUHAIRI. My metric number is 2022815376. First of all, I will discuss about the introduction of China-US trade war. The first point, as we can see here, is China celebrate the 40th anniversary of the start of its reform period and the start of Xi Jinping's second 5-year term as the country's top leader. According to the book titled China's 40 Years of Reform and Development brings together the work of many of the world's best experts on the Chinese economy to mark 40 years of reform and growth in China from 1978 to 2018. After a generation of mostly successful reforms, Xi started his first term by saying that the country was facing major problems and promising big changes to keep the economy growing. The second point is Xi wanted to change the focus of reform and opening, which was development, into a plan for national rejuvenation, so that the China dream could come true. In 31 different pieces, they share their thought on policy reform, economic growth, and structural change over the course of 4 important decades. During these years, China went from being a poor, backward country to having living standards that were higher than the world average and now getting close to those of the high-income countries. And the third one is China has changed a lot after 40 years of reform at home and opening up to the rest of the world. By GDP, it has the second biggest economy in the world, and by purchasing power parity, it has the largest economy. China is an upper middle income country because its GDP per person has hit nearly 9,000. Agriculture has gone from making up nearly 30% of GDP at the start of the reform era to making up less than 8% of GDP. Okay, next, I will discuss about the main goals and scenario of the China-US trade war. There are 4 main US goals that lead to the biggest trade war between the two economies in history, which is, the first one is to reduce the trade deficit and create more jobs. The second one is to limit Chinese companies' access to American technologies and stop the digitalization of industry in the PRC. And the third one is to stop China's military from getting stronger. And last one, to reduce the federal budget deficit. Next, move to the scenario of the conflict. There are 4 scenarios, which is I will discuss the first and the second one. The first scenario is trade war will escalate into Cold War 2. The countries won't give up their political and economic system and won't change them to fit the ways of doing things that the other side wants or suggests. In contrast to Cold War 1, China has a chance to win Cold War 2 because it was able to build a competitive economy and create TNCs that made it to the Global 500. The US will surround China with strong American armed force, making rival alliance like NATO. China, for its part, will try to get the US to lift the APR. The US will explain its unilateral measures by saying that it wants to make better deals, reach a fair deal with China, while still protecting the US economy. The country will reach its goals by giving its trade partner ultimatums if they think their national interests or security are being hurt. Because of this, more and more world problems will be solved by groups of countries that don't include the US. For example here, climate agreements, the nuclear deal with Iran, the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. The China-EU summit in July 2018 don't involve the US. The US will become more and more alone in the rest of the world. The second scenario is consensus to avert the trade war will be reached. A trade war will end when both sides reach a deal. It's possible if the US learns to accept the other side's main concern and core interests. China has already said that it is ready to open its car market, make banking more open, protect intellectual property rights better, and stop American businesses from getting access to new technologies. China might agree to buy as much American farm goods as American farms can make. China is willing to find a middle ground and is ready to buy more goods and services from the US, cut back on government support to its businesses, and make the transfer of American technology more clear. But it's not likely to get rid of the higher import taxes that the US put in place before. The situation doesn't rule out the idea that the trade dispute could be put on hold for a long time. Both countries are very interested in exporting goods and services to each other and building supply lines around the world. Both countries will lose more from the war than they can gain, so it is possible for them to reach a settlement deal and end the war. Even though they are getting more competitive with each other, we can expect that China and the US will stay strategic partners. Business to business ties will get stronger, and people will learn more about each other's societies.
Assalamualaikum, my name is RAZUWAN. So I will continue the third scenario. So the third scenario is the trade conflict is frozen. So the trade war is getting longer and the high taxes on imports are not going away. At the same time, businesses in both countries are getting used to exporting and importing while economic sanctions are in place. They are coming up with business plans to get around trade limits. In this case, the trade gap between the US and China will be getting smaller, and according to official data, will hit a goal level of USD 200 billion, but in reality, items made in China will come to the US market from other countries such as those in the APR that are close by. Most of China exports to the US are things that were put together in China but have many foreign parts and are often branded with an American name. Another 37% of what the US buys from China are parts and components that are used by US producers. TNCs have started to change their global supply lines, and the final assembly of goods may move from China to other Asian countries. It will change how China sells and buys things in different parts of the world. When there are trade war, export and export change. People look to other countries and free trade zones and economic partnerships are formed. Because of this, the companies look for ways to avoid sanction and fight for their own business interests. In this case, the US will reach its goal of lowering the trade imbalance between the US and China, but it will do so in a way that is not good for the economy. So I will continue the fourth scenario. Trade war will escalate into hot World War III. A trade war can move on from the cold stage to the hot stage. This is a bad thing, especially since the US only allow limited use of nuclear weapons. The dispute has to do with the race to be the most powerful economy in the world. The US has a big edge in cyberspace and it wants to take over the world economy digitally. This seems unlikely right now, but it is not impossible. Trump has made things worse by moving against China and on his own in a way that seems to go against the rule of the World Trade Organization. In fact, Trump's America First rhetoric turns off people who could be friends. All of this has given China the political upper hand. Beijing official line is China doesn't want a trade war, but we are not afraid to fight one.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Iman Hakim bin YUSAINI and my student number is 2022-69992. So I will discuss about theories related to the issue. So the theory that can be linked to the issue is realism. This is because of the trade war can be viewed as a struggle between two major powers for influence and power, and both nations act can be considered as attempts to strengthen their position of strength and protect their national interests. So the US-China trade war can be understood as an effort to maintain the balance of power between the two countries. Realism also emphasizes the significance of the balance of power in determining international affairs. Next, I will discuss about analysis of the issue. So the China-US trade war of 2018 had a number of negative effects. So the first one is increased price for consumers. So the China-US trade war of 2018 resulted in higher prices for consumers in both nations due to the US placing tariffs on Chinese commodities and the resulting increased cost of products such as electronics, apparels and toys. So the next one is reduced export. The China-US trade war of 2018 caused reduced exports due to tariffs, reduced competitiveness, disruption to supply chains, and uncertainty. The third effect is reduced economic growth. So the trade conflict slowed the regular flow of trade between the two nations, which reduced economic activity and in turn slow economic growth. So the next effect of the issue is disruption to supply chains. Supply chains for companies in both countries were significantly impacted by the 2018 China-US trade war. So business had to locate alternative suppliers or modify their production processes as tariffs were imposed on a variety of products, which can be expensive and time-consuming. So the last effect is increased tensions between the two countries. The 2018 China-US trade war had a major and wide-ranging negative impact on both countries and the world economy. It was influenced by the blame game, nationalism, political posturing, military tensions, and geopolitical implications. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. My name is AL-AQMAR HAZIQ bin AQSA, student ID 2022764809, and I will discuss the impact of the US-China trade war have on the economy. In 2018 and 2019, China and the United States start reciprocally increasing tariffs on $450 billion in trade flows, breaking a decades-long campaign to lower global trade barriers. Trade between the US and China was decreased as a result of these tariff increases, but nothing is known about how the trade in the rest of the world was impacted. The US-China trade conflict increased overall world commerce by 3%, according to Pablo Fachgelbaum, Penelope K. Goldberg, Patrick J. Kennedy, Amit Khandelwal, and Daria Taglioni's research in the US-China trade conflict and world reallocations. The average rate of export growth was higher in nations with more of their exports subject to robust trade agreements and in nations with higher end levels of foreign direct investment. The US increased its taxes on imports from China in 2018 and 2019. Additionally, it increases the duties on a specific group of imports, primarily in the metals and the machine industries. China replied by putting taxes on American imports. The duties on imports from the rest of the globe were also cut at the same time. The tariff rises mark a significant reversal of global long-term trends towards tariff liberalization. Thank you. Now I will talk about recommendations. The United States is attempting to reverse decades of migration of American production lines to China and the consequent decline of industrial capability and manufacturing employment as a result of the trade war and supply disruption caused by the pandemic after 3 years. Since President Xi Jinping of China has the power to halt exports to the United States at any time, the US government is rethinking its sourcing risks in order to reduce dependence on an increasingly hostile strategic rival. This is especially true for critical goods. A cap and trade system in which the US government grants rights to import specified dollar quantities of Chinese goods and then permits those rights to be sold is the only tool for policy that will accomplish both goals. Next, encourage Chinese businesses to increase their presence in America. Chinese suppliers will relocate more quickly to the United States under the cap and trade system. Many people have already taken this action. For instance, Fuyao Glass, the largest auto glass producer in China, now produces in the United States, accepting the higher expenses to be nearer to customers whose orders vary every day and to shield itself from any political drama between the United States and China. Additionally, Sany, the top manufacturer of excavators in China, is now constructing equipment in America. Additionally, slowing Chinese takeover of high-tech product supply networks in order to quickly establish a dominant production scale advantage and thus a cost advantage in both established high-tech products like solar panels, drones and surveillance cameras, as well as significant new ones like electric cars and advanced batteries. Thank you. In conclusion, the largest trade conflict in economic history may disrupt the structure of international trade and slow down the financial markets. The nations can be split into two groups that together support the US or China while also building massive economic alliances and regional currency zones. Asia's influence on the processes of globalization and the creation of global supply networks is anticipated to grow. the US works to undermine its biggest rival and uphold its leadership in the global economy, politics, and national security. Researchers point out that the US protectionist campaign against its trading partners, particularly the People's Republic of China, has a political component in addition to economic element. The authorities of the US have identified China as the country's main strategic foe in the future. Consequently, the different trade restrictions with the US and other methods to hinder China's economic growth are also tools for halting China's rise to political dominance. That's all for me. Thank you.